The air in Blackwood Gulch carried 3 cents in the autumn of 1888. First came the metallic tang of crushed silver ore sharp as a blade against the back of the throat. Then the resin of ponderosa pine sticky and sweet from the lumber mills that ran day and night. And beneath it all, threading through everything like a warning no one wanted to hear, the cold smell of coming snow. Elena Ashford stood at her kitchen window, watching her husband disappear down the rutted track toward the mine. Marcus walked with the rolling gait of a man who spent his days bent double in tunnels too low for standing. His lunch pail swung from his left hand. His right hand rose in a wave without looking back. He always waved, every morning for 6 years. She did not know this would be the last time. Behind her, Matthias sat at the rough plank table, struggling with his letters. 7 years old, all elbows and determination. The pencil looked enormous in his small hand. He formed each letter with the deliberate care of someone for whom nothing came easy. Mama, is this right? He held up the slate. The word father sprawled across it in uneven capitals. Elena turned from the window. That's beautiful, my love. Rosa, 5 years old and wild-haired, sat on the floor playing with 3 cornhusk dolls Elena had made her. She was singing something, a made-up song about horses and mountains. The kind of song only a child could compose, where the rules of melody bent to the needs of imagination. In the corner, in a cradle Marcus had built from scrap lumber and sanded until it was smooth as river stone, Finn slept. 6 months old. He had Marcus's dark hair and Elena's gray eyes. He was teething, which meant his sleep came in fragments, which meant Elena's sleep came in fragments, which meant the world had taken on the exhausted clarity of the chronically tired. The cabin was small. One room that served as kitchen parlor and sleeping quarters all at once. The walls were rough-cut pine, chinked with mud and moss that dried and cracked and fell out each winter, leaving gaps for the wind to howl through. The floor was packed earth covered with a rag rug Elena had woven from every scrap of fabric she could salvage. The stove in the corner was cast iron, voracious and temperamental, requiring constant feeding and providing heat for perhaps 3 feet in every direction, before giving up and letting the cold reclaim the corners. It was not much, but it was theirs. Or rather, it was the company's, but they lived in it, and that was almost the same thing. Elena moved to the stove and stirred the oatmeal. Outside, the mountains loomed. The Rockies, jagged and ancient, their peaks already touched with white. The first dusting of winter. The aspens on the lower slopes had turned gold, a brief moment of beauty, before the leaves would fall and leave the trees naked against the coming cold. Winter in Blackwood Gulch was not a season. It was a siege. She had lived through 5 of them now, each one a test of will and preparation. Survival measured in cords of wood and sacks of flour, in how well you had chinked your walls, and whether your roof could bear the weight of 10 feet of snow without collapsing in the middle of the night and burying you alive. The wealthy survived more comfortably, of course. Harrison Blackwell, who owned the mine, and most of the town lived in a house of milled lumber, with a stone fireplace and glass windows that actually fit their frames. But for families like the Ashfords, for the miners and their wives and children, winter was democracy at its cruelest. The cold did not care about your dreams or your prayers. It only cared whether you had prepared, and even then whether you had been lucky. Elena spooned oatmeal into wooden bowls. She called the children to breakfast. Matthias came immediately, always eager to please. Rosa had to be called twice lost in her world of cornhusk horses. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from being a family that knows each other's rhythms. Finn woke and fussed. Elena lifted him from the cradle, settled him against her shoulder. He was hungry. Always hungry these days, growing so fast, she could almost see it happening. She sat in the rocking chair Marcus had traded 3 days' wages for, and she fed her son while her other children ate their breakfast. And the morning light slanted through the gaps in the walls, and everything was ordinary and precious and about to end. The mine whistle blew at noon, not the regular lunch whistle, the emergency whistle. 3 long blasts that meant something had gone wrong in the dark places beneath the earth. Elena was hanging laundry when she heard it. She stopped a wet shirt dripping in her hands and listened. The whistle blew again. 3 blasts, then silence. Around the camp, women emerged from cabins. They stood in doorways, hands stilled on whatever task they had been performing, waiting. The mine whistle was the voice of their particular god, and it spoke in a language they all understood. 1 blast meant shift change. 2 blasts meant minor injury. 3 blasts meant death. Elena dropped the shirt back into the basket. She walked toward the mine entrance, joining the stream of women moving in the same direction. No one ran. Running would mean panic, and panic would mean accepting what they all feared. So they walked a procession of wives and mothers, their faces set in identical expressions of controlled dread. Dr. Morrison was there, his black bag already in hand. Reverend Walsh stood near the mine office, his Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. The mine foreman, Jacob Stone, emerged from the entrance, his face gray with rock dust and something worse. "Shaft 7, he said. His voice carried across the assembled crowd. Timber brace failed. Ceiling came down. Elena heard the words from very far away. Marcus had been assigned to Shaft 7 2 weeks ago. A promotion, they had called it. Crew chief, better pay. Deeper tunnels. How many? Someone asked. Stone looked at his boots. 4 men. We're bringing them up now. The world continued. Birds still sang in the pine trees. The wind still moved through the aspens. Somewhere a dog barked, but for Elena everything stopped. Time became thick and slow like moving through water. They brought the bodies up on stretchers covered with canvas tarps. 4 shapes that had been men and were now just the terrible absence of men. Dr. Morrison moved from one to the next, lifting corners of canvas, making his grim determinations. Elena stood very still. Matthias had found her, somehow was gripping her hand so tightly it hurt. Rosa clung to her skirt. Finn was blessedly asleep in the sling against her chest, unaware that his father was about to become a memory instead of a presence. Dr. Morrison stopped at the 3rd stretcher. He looked up, scanned the crowd, found Elena's face. That was how she knew. She, not from words, from the look, from the way the doctor's professional composure cracked, just enough to show the human grief beneath. He had delivered Finn 6 months ago. He had set Matthias's arm when he fell from a tree at age 4. He knew this family. Elena walked forward. The crowd parted. She knelt beside the stretcher. Dr. Morrison's hand rested on her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity in the face of the unspeakable. I'm sorry, Elena. She lifted the corner of the canvas. Marcus lay beneath it, his face peaceful, in a way he never looked in life. He was always moving, always working, always smiling, that crooked smile that had made her fall in love with him 9 years ago in a dance hall in Denver. Now he was still, completely still. The kind of still that was permanent. She did not cry, not yet. The tears would come later in the dark when the children were asleep. Right now, she had to be strong. Had to be the spine that held them all upright. Mama. Matthias's voice was small and breaking. Is Papa sleeping? Elena pulled her son close. Yes, my love. Papa is sleeping. When will he wake up? And there it was. The question that would require an answer. that would break her son's heart. Elena looked at Dr. Morrison, then at Reverend Walsh, who had moved closer, his face gentle with practiced sympathy. "He won't wake up Matthias. Papa has gone to be with God." The boy was silent for a long moment. Then his face crumpled, and he buried it against Elena's side, and his small body shook with sobs. Rosa began crying too, not understanding but responding to her brother's grief. Finn woke and added his wails to the chorus. Elena held them all, her children and her dead husband, and the shattered pieces of the life they had been building together. She held them while the November sun moved across the sky and the shadows grew long, and the other widows came to stand beside her in solidarity, because they all knew that this could have been any of them. This was Blackwood Gulch. This was the price of silver. They buried Marcus 2 days later in the small cemetery on the hill above town. The grave was shallow because the ground was already starting to freeze. Reverend Walsh spoke words about dust and resurrection and the comfort of the Lord, but Elena barely heard them. She was doing arithmetic in her head, grim necessary arithmetic. Marcus had been paid weekly, 50 cents a day, 6 days a week, $3 a week. They had saved almost nothing because there was nothing to save after food and lamp oil and the small luxuries that made life bearable, a peppermint stick for Matthias, ribbons for Rosa's hair. The company would take the cabin. She knew this without being told. Company housing for company workers. No worker, no housing. It was simple economics, simple cruelty. She had perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3 if she begged. The funeral ended. People filed past offering condolences that sounded sincere, because they probably were. In Blackwood Gulch, death was common enough to breed genuine empathy. Tomorrow it could be your husband crushed beneath the mountain. Today you offered comfort because you hoped someone would offer it to you when your turn came. Ezekiel Brennan stood near the back, leaning on his cane. He had lost his right leg below the knee in a blast accident 5 years earlier. Now he lived in a small cabin on the edge of town, subsisting on a tiny company pension and whatever odd jobs he could manage. He was 55 and looked 70, his face weathered to the texture of old leather, his hands scarred and bent. He caught Elena's eye and nodded, a small gesture of respect from one survivor to another. The days after the funeral passed in a numb fog. Women from the camp brought food casseroles and bread and jars of preserves, the kind of charity that would sustain them for a week, maybe 2. Elena accepted it all with quiet gratitude and tried not to think about the arithmetic that kept running through her head. Matthias had stopped talking. He sat at the table and drew pictures on his slate, pictures of his father. A man with a lunch pail, a man waving, a man who was there, and then was not. Rosa asked questions. Where is Papa? Is he cold in the ground? Can we visit him? Elena answered them all with patience that cost her everything. Papa is in heaven. His body is in the ground, but his spirit is with God. Yes, we can visit whenever you want. Finn, blessedly, was too young to understand. He smiled and gurgled and reached for his mother's face with chubby hands. He was the only one in the house who still believed the world was a safe and loving place. On the 3rd day after the funeral, Jacob Stone came to the door. Elena knew why he was there before he opened his mouth. She had been expecting him. Dreading him, but expecting him. Stone was not a cruel man by nature. He was simply a man doing a job in a system that had no room for sentiment. He stood on the packed earth outside her door, his hat in his hands, his face set in lines of uncomfortable duty. Mrs. Ashford, he said, I'm sorry to disturb you at this time. But you're going to anyway, Elena said. Her voice was flat, empty. Stone shifted his weight. The company needs the house. There's a new family coming in, man. with 4 sons all of working age. They'll be starting in Shaft 7 expansion next week. Shaft 7, where Marcus had died. They were already replacing him, already moving on. When? Elena asked. Week's end. I'm sorry. I truly am, but those are my orders. From Mr. Blackwell. Yes, ma'am. Lena looked past Stone toward the mountains. The snow line had crept lower. Another few weeks, and it would reach the valley floor. Where are we to go, Mr. Stone? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. There's the church charity. Reverend Walsh might have space. Or perhaps the Henderson family could take you in for a time. With 3 children, one of them an infant. I know it's not ideal. Not ideal? Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. My husband is dead because the company saved money on timber bracing. Now you're taking the roof from over my children's heads. Not ideal seems an insufficient description. Stone's face reddened. The inquest found no negligence. The company's inquest found no negligence in the company's mine. How comforting. A long silence stretched between them. Stone replaced his hat on his head. You have until Saturday, Mrs. Ashford. I'm sorry for your loss. He walked away, his stride full of the grim purpose of a man who has delivered bad news and wants to be anywhere else. Elena stood in the doorway long after he was gone. Inside, she could hear Matthias reading to Rosa, his voice halting over the words. Finn was making the small grunting noises that meant he would be hungry soon. Saturday. 4 days. That night, after the children were asleep, Elena sat at the table with a stub of candle and tried to make a plan. The arithmetic was brutal. She had no money, no family nearby. Her parents were dead. Marcus's family was in Ohio, might as well be on the moon for all the help they could provide. The church charity was an attic room, damp and cold, already housing 2 other families. The Henderson family was kind, but struggling themselves their own cabin, barely large enough for their 5 children. Denver was 3 days by stagecoach, a city where they knew no one, where they would join the swelling ranks of widows and orphans crowding into tenements and slums, where children froze to death in alleys and women worked themselves to death in laundries for pennies a day. It was not a choice. It was a selection of methods of dying. Elena put her head in her hands. The weight of it all, the absolute impossibility of it, pressed down like the mountain itself. Then her eyes fell on the trunk in the corner, an old steamer trunk that had belonged to her grandmother, Juliana. Elena had inherited it when the old woman died 8 years ago. Inside were Juliana's few possessions: linens embroidered with Italian patterns, a rosary made of olive wood, a leather-bound journal. Elena had not looked at the journal in years. When she was a child, Juliana had tried to teach her to read it. The strange mix of Italian and broken English, the cramped handwriting of a woman educated in another century. But Elena had been young and restless, more interested in American things, American ways. Now, with nothing left to lose, she opened the trunk. The smell of lavender and old paper rose up. She found the journal beneath the linens, its leather cover cracked with age. She opened it to the first page. Juliana's handwriting careful and precise. For my granddaughter, should she ever need the old ways. Elena turned the page. A drawing stared back at her. A cross-section of a hillside with rooms carved into the rock. Detailed sketches of arched ceilings, ventilation shafts, storage alcoves. Notes in the margins in Italian and English. Sassi di Matera, where I was born, where my people lived for 10,000 years. Elena had heard the stories as a child. Her grandmother speaking of a place in southern Italy where people did not build on the earth but within it. Entire cities carved from soft limestone houses layered into the hillsides like the cells of a honeycomb. She had thought they were fairy tales, the nostalgia of an old woman for a home she would never see again. But here in the journal were not fairy tales, but specifications, measurements, diagrams, the practical knowledge of generations who had mastered the art of living inside stone. Elena read deep into the night, the candle burning low. Juliana's voice spoke from the pages, patient and instructional. The earth has a slow, warm heart. Below the frost line, the temperature stays constant. Not hot, not cold. In Matera, we carved our homes deep enough to find this gift. In winter, the earth was warmer than the air. In summer, cooler. Always balanced. Another page, another drawing. This one of a heating system, a massive stone with channels running through it. Rock is a battery for warmth. Build your fire hot and fast. The heat travels through the stone channels. The rock drinks it in and holds it for hours, for days, releasing it slowly. One small fire in the morning, one in the evening. Enough to warm a house all day and night. Elena's hands trembled as she turned the pages. Here was a drawing of a ventilation shaft. There notes on how to find the weakness in stone, the places where it would yield to patient excavation. Air must move. Bad air out, good air in. A chimney is a lung. Design it wrong and your home becomes a tomb. Design it right, and it breathes like a living thing. The candle guttered and died. Elena sat in darkness, the journal open on her lap. Outside, the wind had picked up. It found every crack in the cabin walls and pushed through a cold presence that reminded her how temporary these wooden walls were. But stone. Stone endured. Stone remembered. Stone held heat the way memory held love, slowly releasing it long after the source was gone. An idea was forming. Impossible. Insane. But what did she have to lose except her life? And she was going to lose that anyway if she went to Denver with 3 children and no resources. When dawn came, Elena had made her decision. She woke the children and fed them the last of the oatmeal. She dressed Finn in his warmest clothes and settled him into the cloth sling she wore across her chest. She told Matthias and Rosa they were going on a walk and adventure. "Where are we going, Mama?" Matthias asked. "To see Mr. Blackwell," Elena said. The walk to Blackwell's house took 20 minutes. It sat on a rise above the town, looking down on the mine and the camp, like a lord surveying his domain. It was the finest house in Blackwood Gulch, 2 stories of milled lumber painted white, with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. Elena stood at the gate, gathering her courage. Then she opened it and walked up the path. She knocked. A housekeeper answered, took one look at Elena's work-worn dress, and the children clustered around her, and her expression turned guarded. "Tradesman's entrance is around back," she said. "I'm here to see Mr. Blackwell. It's about my husband, Marcus Ashford. Mr. Blackwell is a busy man. Tell him I'll stand here all day if I have to. Tell him the widow of the man his negligence killed is here and she's not leaving." The housekeeper's eyes widened. She closed the door. Elena waited, her heart hammering. She was burning every bridge. After this, there would be no help from the company, no charity, nothing. The door opened again. This time it was Blackwell himself. Harrison Blackwell was 45, tall and solidly built with iron-gray hair, and a face that had been handsome before weather and responsibility had carved it into something harder. He wore a fine suit and held himself with the confidence of a man who owned the mountain and everything on it. He looked at Elena with an expression she could not quite read. Irritation, yes, but something else beneath it. Guilt, no, that would be too human. Discomfort, perhaps. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "my condolences on your loss." "Are they sincere?" Elena asked. Blackwell's jaw tightened. I understand you're grieving. I understand my husband is dead because you authorized substandard materials for Shaft 7 expansion. I understand the inquest was conducted by men who work for you. I understand my children are about to be homeless because I have no husband to work your mine. I've authorized a severance payment, $30, enough for passage to Denver and a start somewhere else. $30 for a man's life. How generous. Blackwell's face darkened. I don't have to justify my business decisions to you. Mining is dangerous. Your husband knew the risks when he took the job. He knew the risks of honest mining, not the risks of a man who values silver over human lives. They stood facing each other, widow and mine owner, the space between them filled with everything that could not be said. Blackwell opened his mouth, closed it. For a moment, Elena saw something flicker across his face. Pain. Old pain buried deep. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask of authority. This land belongs to the Blackwood Mining Company, he said. Every tree, every rock, from the river to the ridge. You have no legal claim to any of it. Take the money, Mrs. Ashford. Go to Denver. Start over. It's the only sensible choice. You don't own what's beneath the land, Elena said. Blackwell blinked. What? The earth beneath the surface. Your deed gives you mineral rights, water rights, timber rights. But it doesn't give you the right to the air or the earth itself below the surface. That's federal land. She had no idea if this was true. She was gambling everything on words she barely understood on the hope that even a man like Blackwell might not know every detail of mining law. Blackwell stared at her. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply observing that your claim has limits. A long silence. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. On the porch, Matthias held Rose's hand. Finn slept against Elena's chest, oblivious to the fact that his mother was about to throw away her last chance at a conventional escape. Blackwell's expression hardened into something like respect or contempt. It was difficult to tell which. Then dig a hole and die in it, he said. His voice was cold as the coming winter. You have until Saturday to vacate company property. After that, I'll have Stone remove you by force if necessary. He turned and went back inside. The door closed with a sound of finality. Elena stood on the porch, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. She had just burned the last bridge. There was no going back now. Matthias tugged at her skirt. Mama, why was that man mean to you? Elena looked down at her son. 7 years old, trying so hard to understand a world that made no sense. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Because he's afraid, she said. Of what? Of being wrong. That afternoon, Elena took the $30 Blackwell's housekeeper had pressed into her hand as she left, and she walked to the company store. The clerk, a thin man named Parsons, looked up from his ledger. He knew why she was there. Everyone in town knew everything within hours of it happening. Mrs. Ashford, he said. His voice was sympathetic. I'm sorry for your loss. The stage to Denver leaves Monday morning. I can set aside your passage. I'm not going to Denver. Parsons blinked. Ma'am, I need a pickaxe, a good one tempered steel, a shovel. The kind miners use, not a garden tool. Black powder, 2 pounds. Fuse cord. A hammer and steel wedges. Parsons stared at her, as if she had started speaking in tongues. Ma'am, those are mining supplies. I'm aware of what they are. You can't possibly. I mean, with all due respect, I also need beans, 20 pounds, salt pork, 10 pounds, flour, 10 pounds, dried apples if you have them, lamp oil, 2 gallons, matches. Parsons wrote it all down with shaking hands. When he calculated the total, it came to $28.15. "You'll have $1.85 left," he said. "Not enough for the stage fare." "I know." "Mrs. Ashford, please. Think about your children. Winter is coming. You can't possibly survive out there on your own." "Mr. Parsons," Elena said quietly, "my grandmother survived for 70 years in a stone house carved into a hillside in Italy. My children will survive. Please wrap the purchases." Parsons did as he was told, but his hands shook. When Elena left carrying the tools and with the food tied into bundles the children could help carry, she felt the weight of every eye in the store following her. By nightfall, the whole town knew. The widow Ashford had gone mad. She had bought mining equipment instead of a ticket out. She was going to dig a hole somewhere and live in it like an animal. The gossip spread through the camp like a fever. In the saloon, miners shook their heads and muttered about pride and foolishness. In the church, the women prayed for her soul and her poor children. In his fine house on the hill, Harrison Blackwell heard the news from Jacob Stone and felt something twist in his chest. Not quite guilt, not quite admiration, something between the two. "Let me know when she comes begging," he said. "She'll be at my door within a week." But even as he said it, he remembered the look in her eyes, the absolute determination. The thing he had seen in her face that reminded him painfully of someone else. Someone he had lost 13 years ago to a winter he could not fight. Catherine, his first wife. Dead at 28, frozen to death when their cabin roof collapsed under the weight of snow. And he had been away at the mine unable to save her. He pushed the memory away. Elena Ashford was not his concern. She had made her choice. Let her live with it, or die with it. Either way, it was not his problem. Elena spent that night sorting through everything she owned. She kept only what was essential: blankets, the cast iron pot, 2 tin plates, clothes for the children, Marcus's good wool coat which she would wear herself, the Bible, and Juliana's journal. Everything else she left. The corn-husk dolls for Rosa, the wooden animals Marcus had carved for Matthias, the rocking chair, the rag rug. All of it would stay for the new family, the one with 4 working sons. She packed everything into a crate and a canvas sack. It was not much. The sum total of 6 years of married life fit into 2 containers. In the morning before dawn, she woke the children. They dressed in the dark. Finn fussed and Elena fed him for what might be the last time in this cabin. The last time in any cabin, perhaps. "Where are we going, Mama?" Rosa asked, her voice small and frightened. "On an adventure," Elena said. "We're going to build a new home. A new house. Not a house, a home. There's a difference." She settled Finn into the sling, shouldered the canvas sack, and picked up the crate. Matthias carried the pickaxe, which was almost as tall as he was. Rosa carried the shovel. They left as the sun was rising, turning the mountains pink and gold. Elena did not look back. Looking back would mean seeing everything she was leaving behind, and she could not afford the weight of that grief. They walked, not toward town, but away from it, following the creek up into the hills. The path was narrow and overgrown, used mostly by hunters and the occasional prospector looking for new veins of silver. Elena had heard Marcus talk about this area. He and the other miners would gossip about the failed prospects. The test shafts dug by hopeful men that turned up nothing but worthless rock. One of them had been called Garrett's Folly, named after the man who had spent 6 months digging before giving up and moving on. It was on the south-facing side of a steep hill. Marcus had mentioned it was a place that caught the sun all day, useless for mining but beautiful in its own way. That was where Elena was going. They walked for 2 hours. Matthias was strong for a 7-year-old, but the pickaxe was heavy, and he had to stop frequently. Rosa complained her arms hurt from the shovel. Finn slept and woke and cried and slept again. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, Elena saw it. A jumble of granite and dirt on a hillside choked with scrub oak and thorny bushes. A scar on the landscape that no one had bothered with in years. To anyone else, it was nothing. A failed prospect. A waste of effort. To Elena, standing there with Juliana's journal in her mind and her children clustered around her, it was a doorway. It was the beginning of something impossible. "This is it," she said. Matthias looked at the rockslide, at the bushes, at the hillside rising steep above them. "This is where we're going to live. This is where we're going to build our home. In the rocks. In the earth beneath the rocks." Rosa started to cry. "I want to go back to our house." Elena knelt and pulled her daughter close. "Our house is gone, my love. But we're going to make something better. Something that will keep us warm all winter. I promise." She did not know if it was a promise she could keep. She only knew it was the only promise she had left to make. They spent the rest of that day clearing the entrance. The rockslide had almost completely buried it. Elena used a fallen branch as a lever, straining until her muscles screamed to shift boulders that seemed fused to the earth itself. Her hands, already rough from years of washing and cooking and surviving, were torn open within the first hour. Blood mixed with dirt. Sweat stung the wounds. Matthias tried to help, his small face set with determination. "I'm the man of the family now, Mama. Papa said so." "You're my brave boy," Elena said. "But you help by keeping Rosa and Finn safe. That's the most important job." By the time the sun began to set, they had cleared a hole just large enough for Elena to squeeze through. She lit the lantern and crawled inside. The tunnel was roughly hewn about 5 feet high and 4 feet wide. It sloped gently downward into darkness. The air inside was cold and still, carrying the smell of damp stone and minerals. It went back perhaps 20 feet, before ending in a wall of solid rock where the prospector had given up. It was small. It was dark. It was perfect. Elena crawled back out. Matthias and Rosa sat huddled together, looking lost and frightened. Finn was crying in his sling, hungry and uncomfortable. "We're going to sleep here tonight," Elena said. "Tomorrow we start digging." She gathered deadfall and built a small fire. They ate beans cooked in the pot, sitting around the flames as the temperature dropped, and the stars came out in a sky so clear and vast, it seemed impossible. Matthias stared at the tunnel entrance. "Mama, are we really going to live inside the mountain?" Elena looked at the journal, lying open to a page showing a cross-section of Juliana's childhood home. Rooms carved from limestone. Families who had lived and thrived for generations in the belly of the earth. "Yes," she said. "We are. What if the mountain falls on us? Then we'll have tried, and trying is better than giving up." They slept that night, huddled together under blankets, the fire burning low. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient courses. Around them, the wilderness breathed with the small sounds of night creatures and wind through pine. And inside the mountain, in the darkness, in the stone that had waited for millennia, a space existed. Empty, cold, patient, waiting to become a home. The first swing of the pickaxe against stone sent shockwaves up Elena's arms and into her shoulders. The impact rang out across the hillside, a sharp metallic note that startled a raven from a nearby pine. The bird cawed once in protest and wheeled away into the gray November sky. Elena swung again and again. Each strike was a prayer and a curse combined. A prayer that the stone would yield. a curse against the mountain that had taken her husband and now stood between her family and survival. By the end of the first hour, her hands were blistered beneath the calluses. By the end of the second, the blisters had burst and bled. The wooden handle of the pickaxe grew slick with blood and sweat. Her shoulders burned. Her back screamed. But she kept swinging. Matthias sat at the tunnel entrance watching his mother with eyes too old for 7 years. He held Finn in his lap, bouncing the baby gently when he fussed. Rosa had found a patch of flat ground and was making patterns with pebbles, her way of dealing with a world that had become incomprehensible. "Mama," Matthias called. "You need to rest." Elena paused, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She was breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. The tunnel had widened by perhaps 6 inches. At this rate, it would take months to carve out a space large enough to live in. Months they did not have. "I'm fine, my love," she said, and swung the pickaxe again. The work was not like anything she had done before. Washing clothes was hard. Hauling water was hard. But this was a different order of difficulty. This was the kind of labor that broke men who were accustomed to it. And she was a woman who had never done anything harder than scrubbing floors and kneading bread. But she had something those men did not have. She had no choice. By sunset, she had managed to widen the initial tunnel by a foot on each side and deepen it by perhaps 3 feet. Progress, but painfully slow. She stumbled out into the fading light, her legs shaking, her hands a ruin of torn skin and forming bruises. They ate beans again and the last of the bread. Tomorrow she would need to bake more, but that meant finding time between digging, and time was the one thing she could not afford to spare. Finn nursed his small hands kneading at her breast. Elena felt the familiar pull and release, the way her body gave what little it had left to give. She was not eating enough. She knew this. The milk was thinner than it should be. But Finn was growing, and that was what mattered. That night she lay awake in the lean-to she had constructed against the hillside. Canvas stretched over pine branches, barely enough to keep the wind out. Matthias and Rosa slept curled together for warmth. Finn slept in the crook of her arm. Above, through gaps in the canvas, stars blazed in clusters so dense they looked like spilled milk across the black. Elena stared at them and thought about Juliana. Her grandmother had been a practical woman, unsentimental about hardship. She had fled Italy during a time of famine, crossed an ocean in steerage, and built a life in Boston, working as a seamstress. She had buried 2 husbands and 3 of her 5 children. She had survived. "The earth does not care about your suffering," she had told young Elena once. "But it also does not lie. It will give you what it has to give if you know how to ask." Elena closed her eyes and asked. Asked the earth to be kind. Asked the stone to be soft. Asked the mountain to let her in. On the 3rd day, Ezekiel Brennan found them. Elena heard the tap of his cane on stone before she saw him. She was inside the tunnel, chipping away at the back wall by lantern light, when his shadow fell across the entrance. "Mrs. Ashford," he called. "You in there?" Elena crawled backward, emerging, blinking into the daylight. Zeke stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning heavily on his cane. His right trouser leg was pinned up where the leg ended below the knee. He had a canvas sack slung over one shoulder. "Mr. Brennan," Elena said. She was covered in rock dust from head to toe, her hair wild with it, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Zeke studied her for a long moment. "Heard you'd gone and lost your mind. Came to see if it was true. And, well, you're digging a hole in a hillside with 3 children and winter coming. So I'd say the reports were accurate." Elena felt a flare of defensive anger. "If you've come to lecture me, I've come to help," Zeke said. He lowered himself carefully to sit on a boulder wincing as his stump settled. "If you'll have it." Elena stared at him. "Why?" "Because I knew your husband. Marcus was a good man, better than most in this town. He deserved better than what he got." Zeke shifted his cane from one hand to the other. "And because I've spent 30 years digging in rock, and I can see you're doing it all wrong." Despite everything, Elena laughed. It came out half sob, but it was a laugh. "I'm sure I am." Zeke opened the canvas sack. Inside were tools. A smaller pickaxe, better weighted for precision work. A set of steel wedges. A hammer. "Mining's not about strength," he said. "It's about reading the stone, finding where it wants to break." He pushed himself upright and hobbled to the tunnel entrance. Elena followed. They stood together, looking into the darkness where her lantern still burned. "Show me what you've done," Zeke said. They spent the rest of that day with Zeke teaching and Elena learning. He showed her how to tap the rock face with the hammer, listening to the sound it made. A solid thunk meant dense stone slow going. A slightly hollow sound meant a flaw, a weakness in the crystal structure. "The weakness is your path," Zeke said. "Don't fight the mountain where it's strong. Find where it's weak and persuade it." He showed her how to set the wedges in existing cracks, how to drive them in with precise strikes that would split the rock along its natural grain rather than trying to shatter it with brute force. "You swing that pickaxe like you're trying to kill something," Zeke said. "Rock don't respond to anger. It responds to patience." By evening, Elena had learned more about stone than she had known was possible to learn. Zeke had done little of the actual digging himself, his missing leg and age making sustained labor impossible. But his knowledge was worth more than his labor could have been. When he left, hobbling away into the gathering dusk, Elena called after him, "Mr. Brennan." "Thank you." He turned silhouetted against the last light. "Zeke, and you're welcome. I'll be back tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I'm going to anyway. A man's got to do something useful with his time. And God knows the company's done with me." He disappeared into the trees. Elena stood watching the place where he had been feeling something loosen in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The work went faster with Zeke's guidance. Over the next week, they established a rhythm. Mornings were for digging. Zeke would arrive shortly after dawn, and together they would work the rock face, while Matthias watched Rosa and Finn. Elena learned to read the stone the way Zeke did. She learned that granite and schist had different personalities, different ways they wanted to break. She learned to feel the grain of the rock through the handle of her tools to sense when a section was ready to yield. Matthias helped where he could. At 7, he was not strong enough to swing the pickaxe effectively, but he could haul buckets of broken rock out of the tunnel. He took to the task with grim determination, making trip after trip, dumping the debris in a growing pile outside the entrance. "I'm helping build our house, Mama," he said one afternoon, his face shining with pride despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "You are my brave one. You absolutely are." Rosa's job was to keep the lantern filled with oil and to watch Finn. She sang to the baby the same nonsense songs she had always sung, and somehow the music made the darkness less oppressive. Her voice echoed off the stone walls sweet and clear. They were a team, unlikely and desperate and held together by love and necessity, but a team nonetheless. By the end of the first week, they had carved out the beginnings of a chamber. It was roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter, the ceiling arched the way Juliana's journal had shown. Elena left a thick pillar of solid rock in the center, following the diagrams exactly. The journal said it would provide structural support. Elena chose to believe this was true. The work was still brutally hard. Every night, Elena collapsed into exhausted sleep, her muscles on fire. her hands a mass of half-healed wounds. But the chamber was growing. Slowly, painfully, it was growing. On the 8th day, they had visitors. Elena was inside the tunnel working by lantern light when she heard voices outside. Male voices, rough and loud. She crawled out to find 2 men standing at the edge of the clearing. She recognized them. Jack Murphy and Tom Sadler, both miners, both friends of Jacob Stone. They stood with their arms crossed, looking at the tunnel entrance with expressions of hostile amusement. "Well, looky here," Murphy said. "The widow's really doing it, digging herself a grave." Matthias stood in front of his sisters, his small fists clenched. Zeke was nowhere in sight. He had gone back to town for supplies an hour earlier. Lena climbed to her feet, very aware that she was covered in dirt, that her hair was wild, that she looked like exactly what they thought she was, a madwoman. "Gentlemen," she said, keeping her voice level, "can I help you?" Sadler spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Come to see the spectacle. Whole town's talking about it. Woman trying to live like a badger. Then you've seen it. You can go." Murphy took a step closer. "Here's the thing, Mrs. Ashford. You're making folks uncomfortable, making them think about things." "What things?" "About whether there might be other ways to do things, other ways to live. Company don't like it when people start thinking there might be other ways." Elena felt cold settle into her stomach. "I'm not telling anyone else what to do. I'm simply trying to survive." "Yeah, well, your surviving is making the rest of us look bad. Stone says if you can make it through winter in a hole in the ground, maybe the company ought to expect the rest of us to do the same. Save them a fortune in lumber for cabins." So that was it. They were afraid. Afraid that her success, if she achieved it, would become a new standard. A new way for the company to squeeze more from its workers while providing less. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Elena said carefully. "But I have no control over what the company does or doesn't do." Sadler looked at Murphy. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then Murphy shrugged. "Just came to deliver a message. Friendly-like. Might be a good idea to give this up. Take that stagecoach money and head to Denver before you get hurt." "Is that a threat, Mr. Murphy?" "It's advice. Things happen out here in the wilderness, rock slides, animals. A woman alone with small children, well, it just ain't safe." They turned and walked away, their laughter echoing back through the trees. Elena stood very still, her heart pounding. Matthias ran to her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Mama, I was scared." "I know, my love. So was I." "Are they going to hurt us?" Elena wanted to say no, wanted to promise her son that they were safe, that the world was not as cruel as it seemed. But she had learned that lies, even comforting ones, had a way of coming back to wound you. "I don't know," she said, "but we're going to be careful, and we're going to keep building our home." That night, Zeke returned with flour and beans and news from town. He also brought a rifle. "Had it since the war," he said, handing it to Elena. "Minnie ball took my leg at Shiloh, but the rifle came through fine. You know how to shoot. My father taught me, a long time ago." "Good. Keep it loaded. Murphy and Sadler, they're mostly blow, but mostly ain't the same as certainly." Elena took the rifle. It was heavy and cold and represented a future she had hoped to avoid. But hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. She propped it against the tunnel entrance where she could reach it quickly. For the next 3 nights, Zeke slept in the lean-to with them, his presence a deterrent to anyone who might have been planning something. But on the 4th night, he was in town, and Elena was alone with the children. She woke to the sound of footsteps, quiet, trying to be stealthy but audible in the mountain silence. Elena's hand found the rifle. She eased out from under the blankets, careful not to wake the children. The footsteps were moving around the perimeter of the camp near the tunnel entrance. She stepped out of the lean-to, the rifle raised to her shoulder. "I can hear you," she said loudly, "and I'm armed." The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, nothing. Then Murphy's voice came from the darkness. "Jesus, woman, you planning to shoot us? If you give me cause, what are you doing here in the middle of the night?" "Just checking on things, making sure you're all right." In the middle of the night. How thoughtful. A pause. Then Sadler's voice. "Look, we don't want no trouble." "Then leave. Now." She heard muttering. Then the sound of footsteps retreating. Elena stood in the darkness, the rifle heavy in her hands until she was sure they were gone. When Zeke arrived at dawn, she told him what had happened. His face went hard. "They were gonna collapse the entrance. Bury your tunnel while you slept. You don't know that. I know them. I know how men think when they're scared and stupid." He looked at the tunnel entrance, then at Elena. "I'm sleeping here from now on. They try anything, they'll have to go through a one-legged old man with a rifle. And I'm a hell of a shot even with one leg." Elena wanted to protest, wanted to say it was not his responsibility, but the truth was she needed help. She could not do this alone. "Thank you, Zeke. Don't thank me yet. We still got a mountain of work ahead of us." They turned their attention to the most critical task, the ventilation shaft. Juliana's journal was clear on this point. Without proper ventilation, a fire inside the chamber would be suicide. Carbon monoxide would build up invisible and deadly, and they would all die in their sleep. The journal showed two methods. A vertical shaft straight up was ideal, but required precision and tools they did not have. The second option was an angled flue that would run from the back of the chamber, up through a fissure or softer section of the hillside to the surface. It relied on the principle that hot air rises. The shaft did not need to be perfectly vertical, just continuously upward. Elena spent a full day at the back of the chamber tapping the ceiling with the hammer, listening. Zeke had taught her to hear the difference. A solid thunk meant dense rock impossible to penetrate without dynamite. A slightly hollow sound meant a crack, a flaw, a path of least resistance. Finally, near the ceiling on the back wall, she heard it. A subtle difference in tone. "Here," she said. "This is where we dig." The work was agonizing. Elena built a platform of stacked rocks so she could reach the ceiling. She stood on it for hours at a time, her arms above her head, chipping away at a spot no bigger than a man's chest. The angle was awkward. The work was claustrophobic. Rock dust rained down into her face, her eyes, her mouth. She wrapped a cloth around her nose and mouth to breathe, but still the dust got through, coating her lungs with grit. Progress was measured in inches. After a full day of work, she had carved perhaps 6 inches upward at a 45-degree angle. "At this rate, it'll take weeks," she said to Zeke that evening. Her voice was hoarse from breathing dust. "Then it takes weeks," Zeke said. "Ain't no shortcuts on this one. You get it wrong, you die. Simple as that." Elena knew he was right. But weeks meant December. December meant snow. Snow meant the trail down to town would become impassable, and she would have no way to get supplies. She worked faster, longer hours. She skipped meals to save food for the children. At night, she fell into sleep so deep it was like falling into a well. And in the mornings, she woke with her muscles screaming protest. Matthias watched her with worried eyes. "Mama, you're getting too thin." "I'm fine, my love. Papa said lies are wrong even when you're trying to be kind." Elena pulled her son close. When had he become so perceptive? When had he stopped being a child? and started being this small, serious person who saw too much. "You're right," she said. "I'm not fine, but I will be. When we finish the chimney, when we build the fire, when we're warm and safe, then I'll be fine. Promise. I promise." It was a reckless promise, but what were promises except hope given voice? On the 15th day since they had arrived at the site, Elena hit a pocket of softer stone. The pickaxe sank in 4 inches instead of bouncing off. She nearly wept with relief. She excavated frantically, following the softer seam upward. The angle steepened. 30 degrees, 40, 50. She was tunneling almost straight up now, standing on her platform and reaching above her head. The lantern hung on a hook, providing barely enough light to see. On the 18th day, the pickaxe broke through. A shower of dirt and dead leaves cascaded down. Then, impossibly, a shaft of daylight, thin and pale and absolutely glorious. Elena let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Zeke, Zeke, we did it." Zeke hobbled over, looked up at the hole in the ceiling and grinned. "I'll be damned, you really did it." Matthias and Rosa came running. They stared up at the beam of sunlight cutting through the darkness. "Is that the sky, Mama?" Rosa asked. "That's the sky, my darling. That's our chimney. That's how our home is going to breathe." They had given the mountain lungs. News of their progress spread through town. Zeke could not keep quiet about it, too proud of what they had accomplished. And in Blackwood Gulch, news traveled faster than the wind. On the 20th day, Harrison Blackwell came to see for himself. He did not come alone. Jacob Stone accompanied him, along with Dr. Morrison, Reverend Walsh, and 4 miners. It had the air of an official inspection. A delegation from the world of reason come to examine the madness. Elena was inside the chamber building the heating bench when she heard the commotion outside. She crawled out to find them standing at the entrance, looking at the pile of excavated rock, the lean-to, the evidence of her struggle. Blackwell sat on his black horse, looking down at her. Elena stood very aware of how she must appear. Filthy thin, her dress torn, and patched her hair knotted. Next to his pressed suit and polished boots, she looked like a refugee from some disaster, which in a way she was. "Mr. Blackwell?" she said. Her voice was steady. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cowed. "Mrs. Ashford." He dismounted, handed the reins to Stone. "I've heard remarkable things, that you've actually managed to dig a habitable space. Would you like to see—" Blackwell looked at the dark tunnel entrance with an expression of distaste, but curiosity won. He gestured for the others to follow. One by one, they entered the chamber. Zeke lit additional lanterns so they could see. The space was rough but unmistakable. A circular room about 12 feet in diameter. The arched ceiling. The central pillar. Along the back wall, Elena had built the beginnings of a heating bench using flat stones and clay mortar she had dug from the creek bed. The chimney opening was visible in the ceiling, a dark mouth leading upward. Blackwell stood in the center, turning slowly, taking it all in. His expression was unreadable. Dr. Morrison examined the walls, touching the stone. "It's dry," he said, surprised. "I expected dampness, but it's actually dry." "Below the frost line, the earth doesn't weep," Elena said. "My grandmother taught me that." Reverend Walsh looked at the chimney. "Mrs. Ashford, with all Christian charity, I must ask, do you truly believe this is safe for yourself and especially for your children?" "I believe it's safer than freezing to death in an alley in Denver." Stone pointed at the flue. "That chimney will never draw. It's too narrow, too angled. First fire you light, you'll fill this whole chamber with smoke. You'll suffocate." "The angle is deliberate," Elena said. "It follows the principle of rising heat. The smoke will draw because hot air has nowhere else to go." One of the miners laughed. "Ma'am, no disrespect, But I've been mining 15 years. This ain't proper work. No timber supports, no shoring, nothing but hope holding up that ceiling. First hard freeze, whole hill's gonna shift and collapse right on top of you. Blackwell had been silent, studying the heating bench. Now he spoke. What is this supposed to be? A thermal mass heater. The fire burns here in this firebox. The hot gases travel through these channels in the stone before exiting through the chimney. The rock absorbs the heat and radiates it slowly into the room. That's not how stoves work. It's not a stove. It's older than stoves. It's how my grandmother's people heated their homes for thousands of years. Blackwell turned to face her. In the lantern light, his face was hard and angular, all shadows and sharp edges. Mrs. Ashford, I admire your determination. Truly I do. But this is madness. You've built a tomb, not a home. You said that about my plan to survive at all, and I'm saying it again. The first real cold, this chamber will be a block of ice, or the smoke will kill you, or the ceiling will collapse. There are a dozen ways this ends in tragedy, and I can't see a single way it ends well. Elena held his gaze. Then watch. When winter comes, when the rest of town is burning through their wood supplies, rationing and freezing, I'll be warm. My children will be warm. And you'll know you were wrong. Something flickered across Blackwell's face. Anger, respect. It was hard to tell. I've made you an offer before, he said quietly. I'll make it again. $30. Passage to Denver. Start somewhere else. Somewhere sensible. I'm done being sensible. Sensible is what gets women and children frozen or starved or worked to death. I'm choosing survival instead. This isn't survival. It's suicide with extra steps. Zeke spoke up from the corner where he had been watching. Harrison, I've been mining longer than some of these boys have been alive. I've seen every kind of tunnel, every kind of bad idea. This ain't one of them. She's doing it right. Following principles older than you or me. Blackwell turned to his old employee. You've lost your mind along with your leg, Brennan. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally seeing clear. The two men stared at each other. Then Blackwell turned back to Elena. I'll make you a wager, he said. What kind of wager? You make it through winter in this hole, you and your children healthy and whole. I'll deed you this land, all of it, 100 acres. Elena's breath caught. And if I fail? You don't sue the company for your husband's death. You sign a paper saying his death was an unfortunate accident, and you hold no one responsible. The chamber fell silent. Everyone understood what was being offered, what was being asked. Elena thought of Marcus, of the substandard timber bracing, of the inquest that had found no fault, of the justice that would never come. She thought of her children, of the winter coming, of the choice between revenge and survival. And if I die in here, she asked, who signs your paper then? Then I bury you at my expense and raise your children in my household. They'll want for nothing. Elena looked at Matthias standing near the entrance with Rosa's hand in his, at Finn sleeping in the cloth sling, at the home she was building with bleeding hands and desperate hope. Done, she said, and held out her hand. Blackwell took it. His grip was firm, his palm smooth compared to her ruined hands. They shook, sealing a bargain that felt like selling her soul. Jacob, Blackwell said to Stone, witness and document. Stone pulled out a small notebook, scribbled something. Both Elena and Blackwell signed it. Then Blackwell released her hand and stepped back. I'll see you in spring, Mrs. Ashford, assuming you live that long. He turned and ducked out of the chamber. The others followed the miners, shaking their heads. Dr. Morrison looking concerned, Reverend Walsh murmuring prayers. Only Zeke remained. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest, he said. Maybe both, Elena replied. She was shaking now, the enormity of what she had just done settling over her. You just bet your children's lives that this will work. I already bet their lives when I started digging. This way, if I win, they have land, security, a future. Zeke nodded slowly. Fair enough. Then I guess we'd better make damn sure you win. The next week was a blur of frantic work. The heating bench had to be completed, the firebox built, the channels carefully constructed so the smoke would travel through the thermal mass before exiting. Elena followed Juliana's diagrams exactly. The U-shaped firebox at the back, built of flat stones. The serpentine channel running through the bench along the wall. Every joint carefully mortared with clay. It was like building a puzzle where the penalty for getting it wrong was death. Zeke helped where he could, but the work required precision and patience more than strength. Elena's hands became even more destroyed, the clay drying and cracking her skin, the constant lifting of stones, straining muscles she did not know she had. At night, she studied the journal by firelight. Juliana's handwriting, cramped and careful, explained the principles. The fire must burn hot and fast. Small wood, dry wood. The flames should roar for an hour, heating the rock to its core. Then let it die. The rock will give back the heat slowly all day, all night. 2 fires a day, morning and evening, enough to warm a house the size of this one. Elena read it over and over, committing it to memory. She could not afford to get this wrong. While she worked on the heating system, Zeke built the final critical piece, the entrance vestibule. Following more of Juliana's instructions, they constructed a small antechamber just inside the tunnel entrance. It would serve as an airlock, a buffer between the outside cold and the interior warmth. But more than that, they built it with a south-facing wall made almost entirely of scavenged glass. Zeke had gone into town and returned with 4 broken window panes from behind the company store, cast-offs from a renovation at Blackwell's house. They were cracked, but intact. He carefully fitted them into a wooden frame, sealing the gaps with clay. It's a sun trap, he explained to Matthias, who watched the construction with fascination. Even on a cold day, the sun will heat this little room. Any air that comes into the main chamber has to pass through here first. Gets warmed up before it reaches you. Like a coat for the air, Matthias said. Exactly like that. By the first week of December, everything was ready. The chamber was complete. The heating bench was built. The chimney drew air steadily, a gentle current you could feel with your hand. The vestibule, with its glass wall, faced south, already collecting what weak winter sun made it through the clouds. It was time for the first fire. Elena gathered the children in the chamber. Zeke stood near the entrance, his expression tense. This was the moment of truth. Everything depended on this. She had prepared carefully. Small, dry aspen wood split thin. Good kindling. She arranged it in the firebox, her hands trembling slightly. Are you ready? Zeke asked. No, Elena said honestly. But we're doing it anyway. She struck the match. The kindling caught flames licking upward. She added wood piece by piece, building the fire, exactly as the journal instructed. Hot and fast. The flames roared. Heat poured off them, intense and immediate. And the smoke rose into the firebox and hesitated. For a terrible moment, Elena thought it would spill out into the chamber. That Stone had been right, that they would choke and die in the space she had built to save them. Then the draft caught. The smoke was drawn upward, pulled by invisible forces into the channel. Through the thermal mass, up through the chimney. It worked. Elena let out a breath she had not known she was holding. Zeke laughed, a sound of pure relief and triumph. It's working, he said. Lord above, it's actually working. They fed the fire for an hour, watching the smoke draw cleanly away, watching the stone of the heating bench begin to warm. Elena placed her hand on it. At first it was cool, then warm, then hot to the touch. The rock was drinking in the heat, storing it just as Juliana had promised. After an hour, Elena let the fire die down. They sat in the chamber waiting, watching. As the flames diminished to coals and then to ash, the rock continued to radiate warmth. Not the fierce heat of the fire itself, but a gentle, pervasive warmth that filled the entire space. Elena moved to the far side of the chamber, away from the heating bench. Here, in what should have been the coldest corner, the air was warm. Not hot, but comfortable, more than comfortable. "Mama," Rosa said, her eyes wide. "It's warm everywhere." Matthias touched the wall. "The rock is warm, Mama." "How is the rock warm?" "Because rock remembers," Elena said softly. "It remembers the heat, and it gives it back to us slowly, like a gift that keeps giving." Finn, lying on a blanket on the floor, cooed and kicked his feet, more animated than he had been in days. He was warm. They were all warm. Zeke sat on the heating bench and closed his eyes. "I've been cold for 5 years," he said quietly. "Since I lost the leg. Always cold, no matter how close to the stove. But this is different. This is real warmth, the kind that goes into your bones." That night, the first real storm of the season moved in. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, tearing at the trees, driving snow before it in horizontal sheets. The temperature dropped to 20 degrees, then 15, then 10. Inside the earth home, there was only silence. The wind could not reach them here. The cold could not penetrate. They had burrowed beneath it, found the earth's slow, warm heart, and it held them safe. Elena lay on a pallet of pine boughs, covered with blankets, her children around her. Matthias on one side, Rosa on the other, Finn in her arms. Zeke had his own pallet near the entrance, his rifle within reach. The lantern burned low, casting soft light on the stone walls. The heating bench radiated gentle warmth. The air was clean and fresh, the chimney breathing in and out, a lung made of stone. For the first time since Marcus had died, Elena felt something like peace. They had done it. Against every prediction, against all odds, they had built a home inside the mountain, a home that worked. Outside, the storm raged. But inside, in the warm darkness, Matthias spoke. "Mama." "Yes, my love." "I'm not cold." Elena pulled him closer. "I know. Are we safe now?" She thought about the wager with Blackwell, about the winter still ahead, about all the ways this could still go wrong. But she also thought about this moment, this perfect, warm, safe moment. "Yes," she said, "we're safe." And in that moment, in that stone chamber buried in the mountainside, it was true. December came to Blackwood Gulch like an army laying siege. The first week brought snow that fell soft and steady, building drifts against cabin walls and weighing down pine branches until they cracked and fell. The second week brought wind that turned the snow into a horizontal weapon, scouring exposed skin and finding every gap in every wall. By the third week, the town was struggling. In his mansion on the hill, Harrison Blackwell stood at his study window and watched his empire freeze. The mine was still operating, but barely. Men worked shorter shifts, driven inside by cold that made metal tools dangerous to touch with bare hands. Production was down 30%. Costs were up, but these were numbers and numbers he could manage. What he could not manage was the cold inside his own house. He had fires in 3 fireplaces. The best seasoned hardwood money could buy burning day and night. And still the corners of rooms were bitter. Still frost formed on the inside of windows. Still his daughter coughed. Lillian was 9 years old, small for her age, with her mother's delicate constitution. She had been coughing for 2 weeks now, a deep, rattling sound that kept Blackwell awake at night with memories he tried to bury. Catherine had coughed like that 13 years ago in the winter that had broken him. The winter that had taught him that all the money in the world meant nothing if you could not keep the people you loved warm. Dr. Morrison had been to the house 4 times in the past week. Each visit his expression grew more grave. "It's the inconsistency," he had said that morning. "She warms by the fire, then goes to her cold bedroom. The shock to her system, the constant transition from hot to cold, and back again, it's weakening her lungs. She needs stable warmth, Harrison. Consistent temperature." "I'm burning wood faster than I can replace it," Blackwell had replied. "The whole valley is running low." "What more can I do?" Dr. Morrison had not answered, but his silence was answer enough. Now, standing at the window, Blackwell thought about Elena Ashford. He had heard reports from Zeke and from townspeople who had ventured up the hill out of curiosity. The widow and her children were living in their hole in the ground, and apparently they were comfortable. The idea gnawed at him, that a woman with nothing, with no resources beyond a shovel and some ancient knowledge, had managed what he with all his wealth and power could not. It was an insult, or a revelation. He was not sure which disturbed him more. Behind him, Lillian coughed. The sound went through him like a blade. The town suffered in its own way. By mid-December, the communal wood supply was running low. Families began burning furniture, tables, chairs, anything that would feed the insatiable stoves. Abigail Henderson's youngest boy, Timothy, 5 years old, stopped breathing one night when the fire went out and the cabin temperature dropped below freezing. Dr. Morrison brought him back with frantic efforts, but it was close. Too close. Jacob Stone's wife, Martha, developed severe frostbite on her hands from hauling water from the creek. The tissue turned black. Dr. Morrison did what he could, but some of her fingers would be lost. In the saloon, men who normally boasted and gambled sat quiet nursing watered whiskey, their faces gaunt with worry. The winter had them beaten and everyone knew it, and through the town, like a ghost story, circulated tales of the widow Ashford. Warm in her cave, children thriving, somehow impossibly comfortable while the rest of them froze. Some called it witchcraft. Others called it luck that would run out. But a very few, began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had found something they had all missed. On the 20th of December, the old-timers began muttering warnings. Jonas Fletcher, who had been in the mountains for 40 years, stood outside the general store and pointed to the sky. "See that color?" he said to anyone who would listen. "That yellow-gray. That's what the sky looked like before the great white silence of '71. Killed half the prospectors in these mountains. Storm lasted 4 days. Temperature dropped to 40 below. Wind chill beyond measure." "You saying it's coming again?" someone asked. "I'm saying if you got any preparations left to make 'em now. This one's gonna be biblical." The warning spread through town like a contagion. People who had already rationed their wood supplies tried to gather more, but there was none to be had. The slopes around town had been stripped bare over years of mining. What trees remained were buried under 5 feet of snow, impossible to reach, impossible to cut. They were trapped, and the storm was coming. Elena knew none of this. Up in her hillside home, insulated from town gossip by distance and deliberate isolation, she and her family had fallen into a routine. Mornings began with a fire in the heating bench. Matthias had learned to build it properly. Small, dry wood stacked just so, flames roaring for exactly 1 hour. The stone would absorb the heat and radiate it through the day. Then breakfast. Beans or cornmeal mush, sometimes supplemented with game when Zeke brought a rabbit or grouse. Food was not plentiful, but it was enough. Matthias spent his mornings on lessons. Elena taught him reading and arithmetic using the Bible and Juliana's journal. He was bright quick to understand, though. He still struggled with letters that looked too much alike. Rosa played her imagination, conjuring elaborate scenarios with rocks and sticks. She had assigned personalities to various stones in the chamber. The smooth oval one was the mother. The jagged piece of quartz was the father who had gone away, but sometimes came back in her stories. Finn was thriving. At 7 months, he was plump and healthy, his cheeks pink, his eyes bright. He had learned to roll over and was working on sitting up. He laughed often, a burbling sound that echoed off the stone walls and made everyone smile. Zeke came and went, his presence a steady comfort. He slept in the vestibule most nights, his rifle always loaded. The threat from Murphy and Sadler had not materialized again, but vigilance had become habit. Afternoons were for maintenance and improvement. Elena sealed cracks in the clay mortar, adjusted the ventilation, worked on small refinements. The chamber was warm, but she was always looking for ways to make it warmer, more efficient, more secure. Evenings were for stories. Elena would read from the Bible or tell tales from Juliana's life. Stories of Matera, of the Sassy Caves where families had lived for generations in stone houses that were cool in summer and warm in winter, where the earth itself was shelter. Matthias loved these stories. Tell about the city under the ground, he would say. Tell about the churches carved from rock. And Elena would tell him, her voice soft in the lantern light, about a place and a people who had understood something the modern world had forgotten. That sometimes the old ways were not primitive. Sometimes they were simply wise. On the night of December 21st, the storm arrived. Elena woke to absolute silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of the world holding its breath. She rose and crawled through the vestibule to look outside. The sky was the color of old bruises, yellow and gray and purple, all mixed together. The air was so cold it burned her lungs. And there was a quality to this stillness that felt wrong, dangerous, like the pause before an explosion. She crawled back inside and shook Zeke awake. "Something's coming," she said. He listened to the silence, then nodded. "Big one. We should seal up tight. Might be days before it passes." They spent the morning preparing. Extra firewood brought inside. Water containers filled from the creek before it froze solid. Food organized. The vestibule door reinforced with extra timber. By noon, the storm hit. It did not arrive gradually. One moment there was stillness. The next, the world was white chaos. Wind that screamed like something dying. Snow that fell so thick you could not see 3 feet. Temperature dropping so fast you could feel it happening. Inside the earth home, they heard nothing. The wind could not reach them. The cold could not penetrate. They sat in their stone chamber, warm and safe, while outside the world tried to kill everything in it. Elena built the evening fire and fed her children. She nursed Finn and told Rosa a story and helped Matthias with his letters. She did all the normal things while the abnormal raged above them, and the disconnect was dizzying. In town, the storm was an apocalypse. The wind tore roofs off cabins. Snow buried doors. Families huddled in the centers of their homes as far from the walls as possible, burning whatever they could find. The Henderson family burned their table, their chairs, then started on the bed frame. They wrapped their children in every piece of fabric they owned and held them close, breathing warmth into small faces. Martha Stone's frostbitten hands made her unable to tend the fire properly. Jacob did his best, but the wind found every crack in their walls, and the cold was a physical presence that pressed in from all sides. At the Blackwell mansion, Harrison stood in Lillian's bedroom and watched his daughter struggle to breathe. She was wrapped in blankets lying near the fireplace, but her lips were turning blue. Dr. Morrison was there, his face grim. "Harrison, her lungs are filling. The cold air, the stress on her system. I don't know if she'll make it through the night." Blackwell felt something break inside his chest, not his heart. That had broken 13 years ago. This was something else. This was the last piece of his pride, his belief that he could control the world through money and will. "There has to be something," he said. His voice was rough, desperate. "Warmth. Consistent, stable warmth. That's what she needs. But I don't know how to give her that in this storm." Blackwell stood at the window, looking out at the white chaos. And he thought of Elena Ashford, in her hole in the ground, with her 3 children. Warm. The thought came to him like a revelation and an accusation both. He had mocked her, called her a fool, predicted her death. And she had built something that worked while his mansion, for all its fine lumber and stone fireplaces, was killing his daughter. "Get Stone," he said suddenly, "and the snowshoes." Dr. Morrison stared at him. "You can't go out in this. It's suicide. My daughter is dying in my own house. If there's even a chance." He turned to face the doctor. "The Ashford woman. If she's alive, if her place is really warm, Lillian has a chance. Harrison, you don't even know if she survived. I know she was right when I was wrong. I know she understood something I didn't. And I know I have to try." 20 minutes later, Harrison, Blackwell, and Jacob Stone stood in the mudroom, strapping on snowshoes, wrapping themselves in every layer they owned. The wind howled outside like wolves. Stone looked at his employer, his friend of 20 years. "This is madness, Harrison. I know. We don't even know if we can find it in this. We could walk right past it. We could freeze to death 10 feet from our own front door. I know that too. But I have to try. You don't have to come." Stone was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled his scarf tighter. "Martha's hands are ruined because I couldn't keep our house warm enough. Maybe if this works, maybe there's something we can learn." They stepped out into the storm. The world was erased. White above, white below, white in every direction. The wind was a physical force, shoving them, trying to drive them back. The cold was beyond cold, a burning, searing presence that found every gap in their clothing. They had planned to follow the creek. It was the only landmark that might guide them. But the creek was buried under snow, invisible. They navigated by compass and memory and hope. Within minutes, Blackwell could not feel his feet. Within half an hour, he could not feel his hands. The snow had gotten inside his clothes, somehow melting against his skin, then freezing. His beard was solid ice. His lungs burned with every breath. Twice, Stone fell into drifts and Blackwell had to haul him out. Once Blackwell walked face first into a tree. He never saw coming the impact stunning him, blood freezing instantly on his face. They should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back. But Blackwell thought of Lillian's blue lips, her labored breathing, and he kept moving. An hour into the journey, Stone grabbed Blackwell's arm. "We're lost," he shouted over the wind. "We have to go back before we can't find our way at all." Blackwell knew he was right. They had been walking in what they hoped was the right direction. But in the whiteout, they could have been walking in circles. They were going to die out here. Then he saw it. A thin wisp of smoke, pale gray against the white chaos. So faint it might have been imagination. But it was rising steady and clean from somewhere on the hillside ahead. "There," he pointed. They clawed their way toward it, falling, rising, falling again. The smoke grew slightly more visible. Then they saw the rocks, the disturbed snow, the signs of human presence. The entrance was completely buried. They would have missed it entirely if not for the chimney smoke. They began digging frantically with their gloved hands, desperation giving them strength they should not have had. They found the door, buried under 4 feet of snow, but there. They cleared it enough to wrench it open and fell through into the vestibule. The change was instantaneous and shocking. The wind stopped. The roar of the storm became muffled. And it was warm, not hot, not even particularly comfortable by normal standards. But after the killing cold outside, the temperature in the little glass-walled room felt like summer. Blackwell stood there, ice melting from his beard, his hands shaking his mind, struggling to process what he was experiencing. The glass walls, even in the gray light of the storm, had trapped enough ambient energy to make this space 20 degrees warmer than outside. He looked at Stone. Stone looked back. Neither could speak. Blackwell pushed open the inner door. The sight that met his eyes would stay with him for the rest of his life. A stone chamber carved from the mountain itself. Warm light from 2 lanterns. A heating bench running along one wall, radiating gentle heat. And in the center, as if this were the most normal thing in the world, Elena Ashford sat mending a shirt. Matthias and Rosa were on the floor playing some game with pebbles. Finn was in a carved wooden cradle, cooing and waving his hands. The air was warm, clean, fresh. The temperature had to be 55, maybe 60 degrees. More than warm enough, with blankets and proper clothing. Elena looked up. She did not seem surprised. She had heard them digging. "Mr. Blackwell," she said calmly. "Mr. Stone, please come in before you let all the cold air follow you." Blackwell stepped inside, Stone behind him. The door closed. The warmth surrounded them like an embrace. For a long moment, no one spoke. Blackwell stood there, dripping melting snow onto the clean-swept floor. His mind unable to reconcile what his body was feeling with what he believed possible. He had built a town. He had made a fortune from the mountain silver. He had constructed a mansion with the finest materials available. And it was all meaningless compared to this hole in the ground that a widow had dug with her bare hands. How? The word came out as a whisper. Elena set down her mending. My grandmother's knowledge, the earth's warmth, Stone's memory for heat. Would you like to sit? You look like you're about to fall down. Stone had moved to the heating bench without being invited, sitting heavily, his expression one of stunned disbelief. He placed his frozen hands on the warm stone and made a sound that might have been a sob. Blackwell moved mechanically to join him. The warmth from the bench seeped into his frozen body, and the pain of thawing was exquisite. "My daughter," he said. His voice cracked. "Lillian, she's dying. In my house. In my warm house with 3 fireplaces. She's freezing to death." Elena's expression softened. She had expected anger, accusation, mockery. Not this. Not a father's breaking heart. "How old?" she asked quietly. 9. The same age as her son would have been if... Elena pushed the thought away. "What's wrong with her?" "Pneumonia. Dr. Morrison says she needs consistent warmth, but I can't give her that. My house, it's warm near the fires and freezing everywhere else. The shock of it, the constant change." He looked up at Elena. "How is this warm everywhere?" "The rock," Elena said. "It holds heat evenly and releases it slowly. There are no hot spots, no cold corners, just steady warmth." Blackwell looked around the chamber. At the children, healthy and comfortable, at the walls that were dry and warm to the touch, at the reality that destroyed everything he thought he knew about shelter and survival. "Bring her here," Elena said. Blackwell stared. "What?" "Bring Lillian here. Bring anyone else who needs warmth. Children first. You would, after what I did to you, after I took your home and called you mad and wagered against your survival." Elena looked at her children, safe, warm, alive. She looked at the man who had condemned her, who sat broken before her, his pride shattered. "I would," she said simply, "because that's what we do. We shelter each other from the storm." Blackwell put his face in his hands and wept. Not graceful tears, ugly gasping sobs of a man who had held himself rigid for 13 years and finally broken. Stone looked away, embarrassed, but Elena just waited. When Blackwell could speak again, his voice was hoarse. "I'll get her. And the others. How many can you take?" Elena calculated. 15, maybe 20 if we're careful. Children and those most at risk. "I'll bring them." Blackwell stood his legs unsteady. "Stone, you stay here. Keep warm. I'll send people back with a rope to follow. Harrison, you can't make that trip again. My daughter is dying. I'll make it or I'll die trying." He looked at Elena. Something passed between them. An understanding. An acknowledgement of debts owed and forgiven. "Thank you," he said. "Save your daughter first. Thank me later." Blackwell left, following the rope Stone secured to a rock outside the vestibule. He disappeared into the white chaos. For the next 36 hours, Elena's Earth home became an ark. Blackwell made the first trip back with Lillian wrapped in blankets, half frozen himself. He laid her near the heating bench and collapsed. Elena covered him with blankets and let him sleep while she tended to his daughter. The girl was small, delicate, her breathing shallow and labored. Elena had seen this before in other children in other winters. The tight chest, the blue lips, the rattle of fluid in the lungs. She propped Lillian up with rolled blankets so she was half sitting, making it easier to breathe. She warmed broth and spooned it carefully into the girl's mouth. She placed warm, damp cloths on her chest. And she let the Earth home work its magic. The consistent warmth, the clean, fresh air from the chimney that breathed in and out, the gentle heat radiating from every stone surface. Within 6 hours, Lillian's breathing had eased. Within 12, the blue had left her lips. She opened her eyes and saw Elena's face above her. "Where am I?" she whispered. "Somewhere safe," Elena said. "Somewhere warm. Rest now." Over the next day, more people arrived. Timothy Henderson, the boy who had nearly frozen. Martha Stone with her ruined hands. 2 more children from the town. An elderly widow named Mrs. Patterson. A young mother with twin infants. They came guided by the rope brought by men who then returned to help others. They came half frozen and desperate and found warmth that seemed impossible. The chamber became crowded. Bodies everywhere, people sleeping in shifts. But the stone absorbed their heat and gave it back. The warmer it got, the more efficient the thermal mass became. Matthias gave up his space near the heating bench to the youngest children. Rosa shared her blankets with the Henderson boy. Zeke organized the space with military efficiency, making sure everyone had room to lie down. Elena moved among them like a ghost, tending the sick, comforting the frightened, feeding the fire twice a day, with the precise timing the system required. On the second night, as the storm finally began to break, Blackwell woke from exhausted sleep to find his daughter sitting up, breathing normally, her cheeks pink. "Papa," she said. He pulled her into his arms and wept again. "I'm here, my darling. I'm here. Lillian looked around the stone chamber, at the other children, at the warm walls. Is this magic? No, Blackwell said, looking at Elena across the room. It's something better. It's wisdom. When the storm finally passed on the fourth day, the world outside was transformed. Snow had buried cabins to their roofs. Drifts 10 feet high blocked streets. The temperature had dropped to 30 below zero at the storm's peak. 2 elderly people in town had frozen to death. Dozens more had severe frostbite. Every house had burned through its wood supply and was now burning furniture, floorboards, anything combustible. But in the Earth home, 18 people had survived in warmth and relative comfort. As they prepared to return to town, to dig out and assess the damage, Blackwell asked Elena to walk outside with him. They stood on the hillside, the morning sun blinding on the snow. The world was beautiful and deadly sparkling and cold. I came here to tell you that you were wrong, Blackwell said. To watch you fail so I could feel superior. So I could prove that my way, the modern way, the way of money and industry, was the only way that worked. He turned to face her. I was wrong. Completely, profoundly wrong. What you've built here, with nothing but your hands and your grandmother's knowledge, is better than anything I've ever built with all my resources. It's not better, Elena said. It's different. Both have their place. No, it's better. Because it doesn't just shelter people from the cold. It teaches them something. It teaches them that there are old ways, wise ways that we've forgotten in our rush toward progress. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. The deed. 100 acres. I've already signed it. It's yours, win or lose, wager be damned. Elena took it, her hands trembling. Mr. Blackwell. Harrison, please. Harrison, thank you. I should be thanking you. You saved my daughter's life. You saved more than that. You saved something I thought was dead. What's that? Hope. The possibility that there's more than one way to survive in this world. He paused, then asked the question that had been building in him since he first entered her warm chamber. Will you teach the town how to build these homes? Elena thought about Marcus, about the 4 men who had died in Shaft 7, about the choice between justice and healing. Yes, she said, but not for free. Name your price. Safety standards in the mine, real ones, proper timber bracing, regular inspections, no more cutting corners that cost lives. Blackwell flinched, but he nodded. Done. I'll implement them immediately. And you fund the construction. Pay the miners to learn to build their own homes. Make it right. Consider it my penance. They shook hands, this time as equals. The transformation of Blackwood Gulch did not happen overnight. But it happened. That spring, as the snow melted and the world turned green again, the sound of pickaxes on rock echoed through the hills. Families who had barely survived the winter now dug into the earth, creating their own warm sanctuaries. Elena walked from site to site, Juliana's journal in hand, teaching. She showed them how to find the south-facing slopes, how to listen to the stone, how to build the heating benches and dig the ventilation shafts. Zeke and Matthias became her assistants. Zeke with his 30 years of mining knowledge. Matthias with his quick mind and careful attention to detail. Harrison Blackwell funded it all. Materials, wages, time off from the mine for men to work on their homes. It cost him a fortune. But every time he looked at Lillian, healthy and laughing, he knew it was worth it. The first New Earth home was completed in May. Jacob and Martha Stone's place built into a hillside with a view of the valley. Martha's hands had healed enough for her to help with the finishing work, sealing the clay mortar, hanging the door. When they lit their first fire in the heating bench and felt the warmth radiate through the chamber, Martha wept. "It works," she said. "Lord above, it really works." By summer, 5 more homes were complete. By fall, 12. Each one unique, built to fit its family's needs, but all following the same principles: thermal mass, passive solar, geothermal stability. The town was being reborn. Winter of 1889 arrived, and for the first time in the history of Blackwood Gulch, it was welcomed rather than feared. The earth homes maintained their steady warmth. Wood consumption was down by 80%. Respiratory illnesses dropped to almost nothing. No one froze. No one died. Dr. Morrison, making his rounds, shook his head in wonder. "It's like living in a different town, a different world." Elena's home became known as the Hearth. It was the center of the community, now the place where people gathered for meetings and celebrations, where children came to learn and adults came to seek advice. Elena Ashford, the outcast widow who had been told she would die in a hole in the ground, became the most respected person in Blackwood Gulch. 3 years later, in the spring of 1892, Lillian Blackwell came to visit. She was 12 now, tall and healthy, her cheeks flushed with the warmth of the Earth Home's vestibule. She carried a leather satchel. "Mrs. Ashford," she said formally, "my father asked me to bring you this." Elena opened the satchel. Inside was another deed: 500 acres of land surrounding the original 100, and a letter. For the school, it read, "Teach them all what you taught us. Teach them that the old ways are not primitive, only forgotten. Teach them that sometimes the answer to our newest problems can be found in our oldest wisdom. With gratitude and respect, Harrison Blackwell." Elena looked up to find Matthias standing in the doorway. He was 10 now, no longer the frightened 7-year-old who had helped her dig this home. He was strong, confident, already showing signs of the man he would become. "Mama," he said, "the Henderson family is ready. They want you to check their ventilation shaft before they seal it. Tell them I'll be there shortly." Matthias ran off. Elena turned to Lillian. "Would you like to see the journal?" she asked. "Your father mentioned you were interested in architecture." Lillian's eyes lit up. "May I?" Elena brought out Juliana's journal. She opened it to the page showing the Sassy of Matera, the ancient city carved into limestone cliffs. The drawings were faded now, the pages worn from use, but the knowledge they contained was as vital as ever. Lillian bent over the pages, her finger tracing the diagrams. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Like art and science combined." "That's exactly what it is," Elena said. "The art of living in harmony with the earth, the science of thermal dynamics and airflow, both together. Could I copy some of these to study?" Elena smiled. "Better than that. I'll teach you directly, if your father approves." "He will," Lillian said with certainty. "He says you saved his life as much as you saved mine, that you taught him the difference between owning land and understanding it." That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, turning the peaks orange and gold, Elena stood outside the hearth and looked at her world. Matthias was down at the creek with Rosa, the two of them catching frogs and laughing. Finn, now 4 years old, was helping Zeke stack firewood, his small hands serious about the task. In the valley below, she could see the earth homes. Not all the families had built them yet, but enough that the character of the town had changed. Smoke rising from carefully designed chimneys, glass vestibules catching the last light. A community that had learned to work with the mountain instead of against it. Zeke came to stand beside her, leaning on his cane. "Never thought I'd see it," he said. A whole town learning to live like your grandmother's people. It's not about living like anyone else, Elena said. It's about understanding principles. The earth has a slow, warm heart. Stone remembers. These things are true whether you're in Italy or Colorado, whether it's 1888 or 1892 or 100 years from now. You gonna write that down? For the school. Elena thought about Juliana's journal. How knowledge passed from one generation to the next, preserved in careful script and hand-drawn diagrams. How wisdom survived. Yes, she said. I think I will. She went inside and found a blank notebook Blackwell had given her. She opened it to the first page and began to write. For my children and for all the children of Blackwood Gulch, and for anyone who finds themselves facing a winter with nothing but hope and determination. She wrote about thermal mass and ventilation, about reading stone and finding weakness, about the difference between fighting the world and understanding it. But more than that, she wrote about resilience, about the strength that comes from absolute desperation, about how sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly capable of. She wrote until the lantern burned low and her children came inside, flushed from play. She fed them and told them stories and tucked them into bed in the warm chamber that had saved their lives. Matthias, drowsy but fighting sleep, asked the question he always asked. Tell about Papa. Tell how brave he was. Elena smoothed his hair back from his forehead. Your father was the bravest man I knew. He went into the mountain every day facing danger so we could have a life. He taught me about courage, about doing what needs to be done, even when you're afraid. Is that why you built this house? Because Papa taught you to be brave. Elena thought about it, about Marcus and Juliana and all the people who had shaped her into someone who could dig a home from solid rock. Your Papa taught me courage, she said, but my grandmother taught me wisdom, and together those things were enough. Matthias's eyes drifted closed. I'm going to be brave and wise too, Mama. When I grow up, I know you will, my love. She sat with him until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then she returned to her writing. Outside, the spring night was cool, but not cold. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The mountain stood eternal patient, keeping its secrets and its warmth. And inside the earth, in chambers carved by desperate hands and guided by ancient wisdom, families slept in safety and comfort. The stone held them. The earth cradled them. The old knowledge, preserved and passed down and finally understood, kept them warm. Elena wrote until her hand cramped and her eyes grew heavy. She wrote about everything she had learned, everything Juliana had taught her, everything she had discovered through trial and failure and desperate necessity. She wrote so that no one would have to learn these lessons alone, so that the next widow, the next desperate family would have a path to follow. When she finally set down her pen, the first light of dawn was touching the mountains. She stepped outside and watched the sun rise over the valley, over the town that had mocked her, and then learned from her over the land that was now hers, by deed, but had always been hers, by right of understanding. Zeke found her there, standing in the morning light. What you thinking about? He asked. Elena smiled. About my grandmother, about how she crossed an ocean, carrying nothing but knowledge, about how that knowledge, that understanding of the earth and stone and heat, turned out to be worth more than any fortune. Reckon your husband would be proud of what you built, of who you became. I hope so. I like to think he's watching, that he knows his children are safe. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the valley wake. Smoke rising from chimneys, doors opening, people beginning their days in homes that would keep them warm when winter came again. and it would come again. Winter always came. But now the people of Blackwood Gulch would be ready. They had learned the lesson Elena Ashford had taught with bleeding hands and desperate determination. The greatest strength comes not from fighting the world, but from understanding its deep, slow, ever-beating heart. From knowing that the earth itself is shelter, if you know how to ask. From trusting that sometimes the oldest wisdom is the wisest wisdom, and that the future we build is strongest when it's founded on the knowledge the past has preserved. Elena went back inside her warm home to her sleeping children and her unfinished manuscript. She had work to do, a school to build, a community to teach, a legacy to ensure. But for now, in this moment, she was simply a woman who had done the impossible, who had taken nothing and made it into everything, who had dug a hole in the ground and created a hearth, not just for her family, but for everyone who came after, seeking warmth in a cold world, seeking wisdom in an age that had forgotten seeking proof that one person with courage and knowledge and desperate love could change everything. The earth kept its promises, and so would she.